So right now we only have two methods in the provider. There's one to generate the token, and then there's another one to get all of the authorities from the token. We're gonna need a few more because the one at the bottom, the private ones, they're just helper methods. Like we're not actually gonna be able to use them because they're private, and we're not using them here. We're just using them, for clean code. We just define a specific method to do one thing for the single responsibility principle that we know. You always have to try to follow. So now we have to create another method that's going to be able to get the authentication of the user. So the reason we need this method is because if I can verify that a token is correct, I have to tell Spring Security to get me the authentication of the user and then set that authentication in the Spring Security context. So I need another method that can get me the authentication when I pass in the user information once I verify the token. So let's do public. That's going to return the authentication, and I'm just going to call it get authentication. Get authentication, and it's going to take the username. So let's do string username, and it's gonna take the list of all the user authorities. So let's do list, and that can be a list of granted authority, and I'm just gonna call this authorities, and it's also gonna take the HTTP server request. So let's do request, and then here what I have to do in the body is to just call the user password authentication token from Spring. So username password authentication token, and let's do user authentication token, and then we just need to create a new object of this. So it's the new user password authentication token, and we have to pass in the principal, which is going to be the username, and then we need the credential. As you can see, it needs the credential. We don't need the credential at this point because we already verified the token, and then we can pass in the actual authorities. So we're gonna do authorities. Okay, so I'm gonna put this on a new line so you guys can see it. Okay, so we call the username password authentication token, and then we pass in the username and the authorities. And now once we have this username password token, we can just set the details on it. So username password authentication token, that set details, and you can read on what this is doing, but technically what it's doing is it's setting up information about this user in the Spring Security context. Okay, so set details, we're gonna call in the new web authentication detail source, and then here we just have to build the details for that user. And then in the context, we pass in the HTTP servlet request. So we just say request like this. And then all we have to do now is to just return this authentication. Username, password authentication token, which is what we call it right here. This has to be lowercase. And I need a niche. Anyways, you can call this whatever you want. I'm just give it a name. Okay, so that's what this is doing, to get the authentication once we verify the token. Once we have this authentication, then we'll be able to set it to the Spring Security context to tell Spring to say, hey, this user is authenticated, process the request. That's what this is doing. And then I need another one to check to see if the token is valid. So that's the public. Of course, it's going to return a Boolean because it's checking for true and false. And I can do is token valid or something, whatever you want. And then here I need the username, of course, and then I need the actual token to do that verification. And then here for the body of the request, what I want to do again is to call the JWT verifier. And JWT verifier, and you know how to get the verifier. If you remember, we define this method right here to get the verifier, so we can just call this method, which is going to give us the verifier. Once we have the verifier, we can actually use it to check to see if the token is valid. So all we have to do now is to do, let's do return. So we also have to make sure that this username is not null. or it's not empty or anything like that. And there's a library that we can use. I mean, we can do this ourselves in Java, but there's already existing library to do this, and I'm going to show you a very good one that's also very popular that you can use to check to see if a string is null or if it's empty or anything like that. So let's go over to the browser, and I think I'm looking for string util Java, which is here, and we need the Maven dependency. So let's do Maven, and here it is. And we need this dependency, so let's just copy it. As you can see, I'm gonna make this bigger. From the Maven repository, I just grabbed this, the version 3 of the string util, which is coming from Commons dash language 3. So we're gonna go back to the application, and let's go to the PUM file, and here we're just gonna paste that here. And I'm gonna remove this comment, I don't really need it. And that should be everything we need to do here. Okay, so let's close that, or just go back here. So now we can actually use string util. You can do string util, this one, which we just installed, coming from Apache Common Language, language 3, and then we can check to see is not empty. So you can see on the right here, is not empty. It's going to check for null, empty string. If there's anything in it, even if there's space, it's going to return true. So that's why this is so handy, and we're going to use it throughout the application. It's going to be very interesting. It's very popular. The Apache library is very, very popular. Like, I can't think of any Java developers who doesn't know the Apache Common Library. So we want to check to make sure if it's not empty, which is this one. Check for null. I mean, they're very similar. But let's just go with it's not empty, and then we pass in the username, so it's going to return true or false depending on if it's empty or not. And also we want to make sure that the token is not expired, so let's do is token expired, and that's going to be another private method that we're going to use, and it's going to take the verifier, and of course it's going to take the token. And since we don't have this yet, so let's go ahead and create it down there. And all we have to do in this method is to just check the date to make sure it's not after the expiration date of the token. So this is a very short one, so let's do it really quick. So let's do date expiration, and we need to get that from the verifier. So let's do verifier, which we got from here. And we need to verify the token, and we pass in the token. Oops. And then here we just get the expiration date. So get expires at. Okay, that's gonna give us the date the token is gonna expire. All we have to do is to make sure that we're not past the 5 days at this current moment when this method is executing. So all we have to do now, since this returns a boolean, so we can just do return, and we can just take the expiration date, make sure it's before 2 days, so we can just do before, and then we pass a new date in here. That's all we have to do. So this is going to return true or false whether this is before or after. So this, and since here we check to make sure it's not expired, we just have to put exclamation point here. That's going to do the trick for us. It's going to reverse this, because if it's expired, this is going to return true, and we want it to be false here for our logic, because we don't want it to expire. So last one, we need to get the subject. So let's go ahead and create another public method. The subject, remember, is a string, so we're gonna do string and get subject, and all we need now is the token. So we're gonna do string token, and from there we just have to get the verifier again. So I'm just gonna get this line just to get the verifier, and then with the verifier I can get the token by just verifying the token and call get subject on it. So I'm just going to return this verify the token, so we have to make sure the token is correct, and then we call get subject. As you can see here, you can check to see all the method that exist inside this verifier. So I think for now, I don't think I'm missing anything. I think that's all we're gonna need for the provider, the JSON Web Token provider. I want to turn this into a component so that it can be skinned by the Spring. So component. So whenever the application start, I will have a bean of JSON JWT token provider. Okay, so I think I'll put a space here since this is the only variable. So again, we have our secret coming from our YAML file, which we have to keep secure, which is this one. So again, we have one to generate the token. So once they log in, we validate their token, validate their credential. We can give them a token, pass it in the header, and you'll see how this is going to be done. We have another one to get the authorities, get authentication, and another one to check if the token is valid, etc., etc. So I think for now, that's all I need in the token provider. Maybe I'm forgetting something. If I'm forgetting something, then I'll figure it out later, and then I'll come back here and then put it in. If I'm start using the controllers and things like that, I'm like, oh, I need this other method that I forgot to put in. But I think I got all of them. So if we miss something, we can just go back and put it in there. And of course, this is bound to grow. It's probably gonna grow as you have more specification, or you might have to create like another one, or maybe change this name to be very specific and then create another one in the same package and things like that. So things will vary over time, so there's nothing like set in stones or anything like that. If you forget something, you can always go back and then change it. You might want to try not to do that. From the get-go, you want to make sure everything is like perfectly laid out and everything like that. But you can still go back and make changes.